at 07:35 hours on October 25, 1944. Lookouts aboard USS Samuel Booker. Roberts spotted shapes on the horizon. 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers. The most powerful surface force the Imperial Japanese Navy could still muster. The battleship Yamato alone displaced 72,000 tons and mounted 9 18.1-inch guns. Each shell weighed 3,200 pounds. Samuel Booker Roberts displaced 1,745 tons. Her main battery consisted of 2 5-inch 38 caliber guns. Each shell weighed 54 pounds. Lieutenant Commander Robert William Copeland picked up the 1MC public address microphone. His voice echoed through every compartment of the tiny Destroyer Escort. "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can," he ordered flank speed. 35 minutes later, Samuel Booker Roberts was sinking. 90 men were dead, but the Japanese task force had turned away. The amphibious invasion fleet off Leyte Gulf remained safe. A ship that cost $2.1 million and took 4 months to build had stopped a fleet worth hundreds of millions. The Destroyer Escort, designed as the cheapest possible submarine hunter, had fought like a battleship. This would prove to be both the exception and the rule. The story begins 3 years earlier, in the North Atlantic, where German U-boats were destroying Allied merchant shipping faster than shipyards could replace it. In 1941, U-boats sank over 2 million tons of Allied shipping. In 1942, the total exceeded 6.2 million tons. Over 1,000 merchant ships went to the bottom. The math was simple and catastrophic. At this rate, Britain would starve before Germany could be invaded. The Royal Navy, in 1941, operated 146 destroyers. Half were sunk or damaged by year's end. The survivors were stretched across global commitments: home fleet operations, Mediterranean convoy duty, Arctic convoys to Murmansk, Indian Ocean patrols. Destroyer construction required 2 years per ship and consumed resources desperately needed elsewhere. Britain could not build enough destroyers to protect convoys and still maintain fleet strength. Canada operated corvettes, small, maneuverable, seaworthy vessels that could escort convoys in North Atlantic storms. But corvettes were slow. Maximum speed, 16 knots. A surfaced U-boat could make 17 knots. Corvettes could not catch submarines running on the surface at night. They lacked the range for mid-ocean operations. Their short hulls made them abysmal gun platforms in heavy seas. Crews suffered terribly. The Royal Navy also operated sloops, larger than corvettes, better armed, with superior range. But sloop construction used the same facilities and resources as fleet destroyers. Building sloops meant not building destroyers. The Admiralty faced an impossible choice: protect convoys or maintain fleet strength. Choose wrong and lose the war either way. In June 1941, Captain Edward Lewis Cochrane of the American Bureau of Shipping received an urgent request. Britain needed a new type of warship. Specifications were precise: must operate effectively against submarines in open ocean, must maintain 20 knots in North Atlantic weather, must have sufficient range for mid-ocean convoy duty, must be cheap enough for mass production, must not require facilities or components needed for fleet destroyers, must be simple enough for rapid construction by yards with limited experience. Cochrane studied the requirements for 3 weeks. The solution required accepting limitations. A convoy escort did not need 33 knot speed. Convoys traveled at 10 to 12 knots. The escort needed to maneuver relative to the convoy, pursue detected submarines, and maintain station in heavy weather. 20 to 24 knots was sufficient. This single decision required horsepower by 80% compared to fleet destroyers. Lower power requirements meant smaller engines. Smaller engines meant smaller hulls. Smaller hulls meant less steel. Less steel meant lower cost and faster construction. The cascade effect was dramatic. Cochrane's design, dated June 1941, specified a 300-foot hull, displacing approximately 1,400 tons standard. Length overall, 289 feet 5 inches. Beam, 35 feet. Draft, 11 feet 8 inches. Standard displacement, 1,360 tons. Full load displacement, 1,435 tons. Armament would be minimal. 3 3-inch 50 caliber dual-purpose guns, 1 quadruple 1.1-inch anti-aircraft mount, 9 20mm cannons, 2 depth charge racks, 8K gun depth charge throwers, 1 Hedgehog forward-throwing mortar, no torpedo tubes. The ship was designed to kill submarines, not fight surface actions. Propulsion presented the most significant challenge. Fleet destroyers used geared steam turbines. High-pressure boilers generated steam. Turbines converted thermal energy to shaft power. Reduction gears matched turbine speed to propeller speed. This system provided excellent power-to-weight ratio but required precision manufacturing. Gear-cutting machines operated near capacity, producing gears for fleet destroyers. Additional demand would delay fleet destroyer construction. Cochrane specified diesel-electric propulsion. 4. General Motors. 16-cylinder diesel engines would generate electrical power. Electric motors mounted near the propellers would convert electrical power to shaft power. No reduction gears required. Diesel engines were already in production for submarines and merchant ships. Additional units could be manufactured without affecting fleet construction. Total shaft horsepower, 6,000. This compared to 50,000 for a fleet destroyer. But the Destroyer Escort needed to make only 21 knots, not 33. 6,000 horsepower was sufficient. The design was designated British Destroyer Escort. 50 ships were ordered under Lend-Lease in July 1941. Britain would receive the vessels, commission them into the Royal Navy, and deploy them on convoy duty. American yards would build them. American industry would supply components. Britain's shipyards could focus on fleet destroyers and capital ships. Then Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, Japanese carrier aircraft struck Pearl Harbor. The United States entered the war. Within weeks, German U-boats began operating off the American East Coast. The slaughter was unprecedented. Between January and August 1942, U-boats sank 397 merchant ships in American coastal waters. Tankers burned within sight of Atlantic City. Torpedoed freighters drifted onto beaches. Survivors washed ashore. The waters off Cape Hatteras became known as Torpedo Junction. The United States Navy possessed virtually no coastal escorts. Most fleet destroyers had deployed to the Pacific. Ancient four-stack destroyers from World War I provided inadequate coverage. Patrol craft and Coast Guard cutters were insufficient. Merchant ships sailed independently because there were not enough escorts to organize convoys. U-boats operated on the surface at night, picking off targets silhouetted against shorelights that American cities refused to dim. In January 1942, the Navy revised the British Destroyer Escort Order. Of the 50 ships under construction, only 6 would go to Britain. The remaining 44 would be commissioned in the United States Navy with the designation Destroyer Escort. Hull classification symbol, Delta Echo. Additional ships would be ordered immediately. Between November 1941 and May 1943, the Navy ordered 1,005 destroyer escorts in 6 classes. The number was later revised to 563 as requirements became clearer, but the initial order of over 1,000 ships revealed the desperation. The Navy planned to flood the Atlantic with escorts. Design work expanded rapidly. The original British destroyer escort design became the Evarts class, but diesel engine production proved insufficient. Diesel engines required precision machining. Cylinders, pistons, crankshafts, fuel injection systems all demanded tight tolerances. The same machine shops producing diesel engines for submarines could not simultaneously produce enough for destroyer escorts. Engine production became the bottleneck. Engineers developed alternatives. In January 1942, General Electric designed a turboelectric propulsion system. Steam turbines would drive electrical generators. Electric motors would drive the propellers. The system required 12,000 shaft horsepower worth of turbines, but those turbines required no reduction gears. Steam turbine production capacity exceeded gear production capacity. Turboelectric drive solved the bottleneck. This became the Buckley class. Length, 306 feet. Beam, 37 feet. Draft, 11 feet 8 inches. Standard displacement, 1,400 tons. Full load displacement, 1,740 tons. Armament, 3 3-inch 50 caliber guns. Later units received 2 5-inch 38 caliber guns, 1 twin 40 mm mount, 8 20 mm guns, 8 depth charge throwers, 1 Hedgehog, 3 21-inch torpedo tubes, turboelectric propulsion, 12,000 shaft horsepower, maximum speed, 24 knots. A third class used direct drive diesel engines. Fairbanks Morse opposed piston diesels. the same engines powering fleet submarines, connected directly to reduction gears. This was the Edsall class, virtually identical to Cannon class in dimensions and armament, but with different engines. 85 Edsall class ships were built. 37 were manned by United States Coast Guard crews, the only destroyer escort class so operated. The Cannon class retained diesel-electric drive, but with only 4 engines for 6,000 shaft horsepower. Maximum speed dropped to 21 knots, but range increased dramatically. Fuel oil capacity, 367 tons, range at 12 knots, 10,500 nautical miles. This compared to 4,500 nautical miles for turbo-electric ships. The Cannon class could cross the Atlantic, operate for weeks, and return without refueling. USS Slater, Delta Echo 766, was a Cannon-class destroyer escort, commissioned May 1, 1944. She survives today as a museum ship in Albany, New York. Visiting her reveals what these ships were: small, cramped, functional. The bridge is tiny. The pilot house barely accommodates 4 people. The chart table folds down from the bulkhead. The sonar shack is a closet with equipment bolted to every surface. The captain's cabin is smaller than a modern walk-in closet. Below decks, the spaces are even tighter. The forward engine room contains 2 massive 16-cylinder diesel engines. The generators they drive fill the aft engine room. The spaces between equipment measure inches. Men worked in 100-degree heat, deafening noise, and complete darkness during battle when hatches were dogged shut and lights extinguished. The crew slept in bunks stacked 3 high with 18 inches of clearance. 186 men lived aboard a ship barely longer than a football field. But the weapons were effective. The Hedgehog, mounted forward between the No. 1 and No. 2 guns, fired 24 contact-fused projectiles in an oval pattern 65 yards ahead of the ship. Unlike depth charges, which detonated at preset depths regardless of whether they struck a submarine, Hedgehogs exploded only on contact. This created a psychological advantage. When Hedgehogs exploded, everyone knew a submarine had been hit. When Hedgehogs failed to explode, the crew could reload and attack again without waiting for depth charges to sink and detonate. The K guns, mounted amidships 4 per side, hurled depth charges up to 150 feet from the ship, combined with stern racks that rolled charges off the fantail. A destroyer escort could place a pattern of 14 depth charges in the water every 30 seconds. The pattern created a cube of explosive force approximately 100 yards on each side. A submarine within the cube would be crushed by hydrostatic shock, even if no charge exploded in direct contact. The 3-inch guns, while small by destroyer standards, were effective against surfaced submarines. Rate of fire: 20 rounds per minute per gun. A destroyer escort could fire 63-inch shells per minute at a target. In 1943 and 1944, many U-boats carried heavy anti-aircraft armament. Some attempted to fight it out on the surface rather than dive. Destroyer escorts won these engagements through volume of fire. The first destroyer escort commissioned in the United States Navy was USS Brennan, Delta Echo 13, on January 20, 1943. She immediately deployed to the Atlantic. By March, 12 destroyer escorts were operational. By June, 43. By December, 152. By war's end, 479 destroyer escorts had been commissioned. Production was extraordinary. Multiple shipyards built destroyer escorts simultaneously. Some yards had never built warships. They had constructed merchant ships, fishing vessels, coastal traders. But destroyer escort designs used merchant ship construction techniques wherever possible. Welding instead of riveting, modular assembly, prefabricated sections. The methods that Henry Kaiser used to build Liberty ships in 42 days were applied to warships. USS Samuel Booker Roberts, Delta Echo 413, was laid down January 6, 1944, at Brown Shipbuilding Company in Houston, Texas. Launched January 20th, commissioned April 28th. 4 months from keel laying to commissioning. She was the 174th destroyer escort commissioned. Another 305 would follow. The cost was equally impressive. A destroyer escort cost between $1.4 and $2.1 million depending on class and equipment. A Fletcher-class fleet destroyer cost $6.3 million. A destroyer escort cost 1/3 as much. The Navy could build 3 destroyer escorts for the price of 1 fleet destroyer. Given the desperate shortage of escorts, this arithmetic determined strategy. In the Atlantic, destroyer escorts transformed convoy defense. Before 1943, Convoys relied on whatever escorts were available. Often this meant a handful of corvettes and perhaps one destroyer. U-boat wolf packs attacked with overwhelming numbers. 20 to 30 submarines would concentrate against a convoy. The escorts, outnumbered 10 to 1, fought desperate actions. Merchant ships died. After May 1943, convoys traveled with dedicated escort groups. A typical group included one destroyer as leader, 4 to 6 destroyer escorts, and occasionally an escort carrier. The destroyer provided command and control. The destroyer escorts provided the muscle. They could pursue contacts, attack with hedgehogs and depth charges, and maintain station regardless of weather. Convoys began getting through. The statistics tell the story. In March 1943, U-boats sank 120 Allied ships, totaling 693,000 tons. 15 U-boats were lost. In May 1943, U-boats sank 58 ships, totaling 299,000 tons. 43 U-boats were lost. The exchange rate had inverted. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat force, withdrew from the North Atlantic on May 24th. We had lost the Battle of the Atlantic. Destroyer escorts were not solely responsible. Long-range aircraft closed the mid-Atlantic air gap. Improved radar detected surfaced U-boats at night. High-frequency direction finding allowed escorts to track U-boat radio transmissions. Escort carriers provided air cover where land-based aircraft could not reach. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park decrypted German signals, revealing U-boat positions. All these factors contributed, but destroyer escorts provided the platforms that made these technologies effective. The ships were everywhere. Hunter-killer groups formed around escort carriers with destroyer escorts as screens. These groups actively hunted U-boats rather than waiting for attacks. USS Guadalcanal, escort carrier, with destroyer escorts Pillsbury, Pope, Flaherty, Chatelaine, and Jenks, captured U-505 on June 4, 1944. The submarine was boarded, her crew captured, her Enigma machine and codebook seized. This was the only German submarine captured by the United States Navy during World War II. Destroyer escorts made it possible. In the Pacific, destroyer escorts performed different missions. Submarine threat was less severe. Japanese submarines focused on warships rather than merchant ships, but amphibious operations required massive numbers of escorts. Landing forces needed protection from air attack. Surface raiders and submarines. Destroyer escorts provided this protection. Task Unit 77.4.3. Radio call sign Taffy 3. Consisted of 6 escort carriers, 3 fleet destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. The carriers provided air support for landings at Leyte Gulf. The destroyers and destroyer escorts provided anti-aircraft and anti-submarine protection. On paper, Taffy 3 existed to support ground forces. In reality, it would fight the most lopsided surface action in naval history. At 06:45 hours on October 25, 1944, Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague received a radio message from one of his patrol aircraft. Enemy surface force sighted: 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers, bearing north. Distance 18 miles, speed 25 knots. Sprague did not believe it. The report was impossible. Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet was supposed to be guarding San Bernardino Strait. The Japanese could not have gotten through, but the pilot repeated his message. Enemy surface force closing rapidly. Sprague looked through his binoculars. On the horizon, pagoda masts, battleships, coming fast. The Japanese center force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita had passed through San Bernardino Strait during the night. Halsey had taken the bait. The Third Fleet was 200 miles north, chasing Japanese carriers. The heavy forces of 7th Fleet were engaged to the south. Taffy 3. 6 thin-skinned escort carriers and 7 escorts stood alone against the most powerful surface force Japan could still deploy. The 6 escort carriers could make 18 knots maximum. The Japanese cruisers could make 33. Simple mathematics said Taffy 3 would be caught within 90 minutes. The carriers mounted no guns larger than 5 inches. The Japanese battleships mounted guns up to 18.1 inches. One hit would destroy an escort carrier. The arithmetic was not merely unfavorable, it was hopeless. Sprague ordered his carriers to flee south. He ordered his aircraft launched immediately with whatever ordnance they carried. Depth charges, general-purpose bombs. Some fighters launched with only machine gun ammunition. He ordered his escorts to lay smoke. Then, he made the critical decision. He ordered his destroyers and destroyer escorts to attack. 3 fleet destroyers charged the Japanese line. USS Johnston, Hull, and Heermann, 2,400 tons each. 5 5-inch guns, 10 21-inch torpedoes. They were designed to fight cruisers and destroyers. They were about to engage battleships. Behind them came 4 destroyer escorts. USS Samuel Booker Roberts, John Charles Butler, Dennis, and Raymond, 1,700 tons each. 2 5-inch guns, 3 torpedoes. They were designed to hunt submarines. They were about to fight the Yamato. Johnston attacked first. Commander Ernest Evans took his destroyer to flank speed and charged directly at the Japanese cruiser column. He closed to 10,000 yards. He fired all 10 torpedoes. At least 3 hit the heavy cruiser Kumano, blowing off her bow. She fell out of formation, flooding and burning. Johnston then engaged with her 5-inch guns. She closed to point-blank range, firing at Japanese cruisers that outweighed her 30-1. The cruiser Haguro returned fire. The battleship Congo fired her 14-inch main battery at a destroyer. Several shells hit Johnston. Her bridge was wrecked. Her number 1 engine room was destroyed. Half her guns were knocked out. She lost steering. She slowed to 17 knots, but she kept fighting. Hull attacked next. She launched her torpedoes at battleships. She engaged with gunfire. She took over 40 hits from Japanese cruisers and battleships. Her bridge was destroyed. Her engineering spaces flooded. Her magazines were on fire. She rolled over and sank at 08:55 hours. 253 men died. 86 survived. Heermann attacked in coordination with Hull. She fired her torpedoes at battleship Haruna. She closed to 6,000 yards and engaged with her main battery. Straddled repeatedly by Japanese shells, she maneuvered radically, using smoke and rain squalls for cover. She survived the battle. Then came the destroyer escorts. USS Samuel Booker Roberts charged at the heavy cruiser Chikuma. Lieutenant Commander Copeland took his ship into the Japanese formation. At 0750 hours, Roberts fired her 3 torpedoes. At least 1 hit Chikuma, causing severe damage. Roberts then engaged with her 2 5-inch guns. The forward 5-inch gun fired so rapidly its barrel began to droop from overheating. The crew ignored standard fire control procedures and aimed by eye. They fired over 600 shells in the next 2 hours. They shifted between targets. Cruisers, destroyers, anything within range. The little destroyer escort closed to within 5,000 yards of ships designed to withstand 14-inch gunfire. The Japanese returned fire. At 0851 hours, a shell struck Roberts below the waterline. The hit flooded the forward engine room. Speed dropped from 28 knots to 17. Another shell hit penetrated the aft magazine. The explosion destroyed the number 2 engine room. All power was lost. The ship lost steering and communications. At 0905 hours, a 14-inch shell from either Congo or Haruna struck Roberts amidships. The shell tore a 30-foot gash in the port side. It obliterated the number 2 engine room. It ruptured fuel tanks. Fires spread throughout the ship. The destroyer escort began listing to port. Copeland ordered abandoned ship at 0910 hours. The crew went over the side into the Philippine Sea. The ship capsized and sank at 0935 hours. 90 men died, including 3 who survived the sinking but were lost while waiting for rescue. 120 men survived. USS Dennis, John Charles Butler, and Raymond continued the attack. They fired their remaining torpedoes. They engaged with their 5-inch guns. They made smoke to conceal the fleeing carriers. They drew Japanese fire deliberately. They were mosquitoes attacking elephants, but they kept fighting. By 0930 hours, the battle entered its 3rd hour. Taffy 3 had lost 2 destroyers and 1 destroyer escort. 1 escort carrier, USS Gambier Bay, had been sunk by Japanese cruisers. The other 5 carriers were damaged, but still afloat, still fleeing, still launching aircraft. And then the Japanese turned away. Admiral Kurita, aboard Yamato, believed he was engaging fleet carriers, not escort carriers. The ferocity of the destroyer and destroyer escort attacks convinced him he faced a much larger force. His ships had taken damage. His formation was dispersed. American aircraft were attacking continuously. He decided the risk was too great. At 0932 hours, he ordered the center force to disengage and withdraw north. Taffy 3 had survived. 6 escort carriers and 4 escorts had stopped 23 Japanese warships, including 4 battleships. The arithmetic should have been impossible, but destroyer escorts had made it possible. Samuel Booker Roberts received the Presidential Unit Citation. She became known as the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. But this description, while dramatic, misses the point. She did not fight like a battleship. She fought like a destroyer escort. Small, expendable, willing to die to protect the ships she was assigned to guard. That was what destroyer escorts were designed to do. The war demonstrated their versatility. In the Atlantic, they hunted submarines. In the Pacific, they escorted amphibious forces. They provided anti-aircraft defense. They rescued downed pilots. They served as radar pickets at Okinawa, absorbing kamikaze attacks meant for larger ships. They performed every unglamorous mission that fleet destroyers were too valuable to risk. The statistics of destroyer escort production reveal American industrial capacity at peak performance. 563 ships completed. 1,005 ships ordered initially. Orders canceled in September 1943 when analysis showed fewer would be needed. The ability to cancel orders for 442 ships demonstrated confidence. American shipyards were producing so many escorts that demand could not keep pace with supply. Compare this to Germany. The Kriegsmarine operated 39 U-boats in September 1939. Production expanded slowly. By mid-1943, 237 U-boats were operational. Monthly production peaked at 30 boats. The entire German submarine building program, from 1939 to 1945, produced 1,154 U-boats. American yards built 563 destroyer escorts in less than 3 years. The implications were strategic. Germany needed to sink Allied ships faster than they could be replaced. Simultaneously, Germany needed to build U-boats faster than they were sunk. Germany failed both tests. Allied merchant ship production exceeded losses after July 1943. U-boat losses exceeded production after May 1943. The curve had inverted. Industrial attrition determined the war's outcome. Destroyer escorts represented a specific philosophy of naval warfare. Build simple platforms in overwhelming numbers. Sacrifice individual capability for collective effect. Accept losses as inevitable, but ensure the mission succeeds. These were warships designed to be expendable. Crews understood this. They sailed anyway. After the war, destroyer escorts remained in service. Many were mothballed, but retained in reserve. Korea saw them reactivated. Vietnam saw USS Dennis and USS Brister transferred to South Vietnam's Navy. Cold War modifications converted some to radar picket ships, designated Delta Echo Romeo. Others received anti-submarine modernization. Most were eventually scrapped or transferred to Allied navies under military assistance programs. USS Slater is the only destroyer escort preserved afloat in the United States. She serves as memorial and museum. Walking her decks provides understanding. These were small ships, uncomfortable, dangerous. Men slept in tiered bunks with no privacy. They ate in cramped mess decks. They worked in spaces barely large enough to move. In North Atlantic storms, the ships rolled 40 degrees. In typhoons, they buried their bows in green water. In combat, they closed to ranges measured in yards. The crews were young. Average age was 20. Many had never seen the ocean before enlisting. Training lasted 16 weeks. Then they went to sea. Some survived. Some did not. Of the 563 destroyer escorts commissioned, 8 were lost to enemy action. USS Shelton, sunk by Japanese submarine. USS Eversole, sunk by Japanese submarine. USS Underhill, sunk by Japanese suicide boat. USS Frederick Cadwallader Davis, sunk by German submarine. U-546, in the last U-boat kill of the Atlantic War. USS Rich, sunk by mine off Normandy. USS Fiske, sunk by German submarine. U-804. USS Donnell, sunk by kamikaze at Okinawa. USS Samuel Booker Roberts, sunk at Samar. 1,745 tons, 2 5-inch guns, 90 men dead. But the mission succeeded. That was what destroyer escorts were built to do. They were the jeeps of the ocean. Simple, reliable, everywhere. They could not match the speed of fleet destroyers or the firepower of cruisers or the prestige of battleships, but they could be built quickly, in enormous numbers, by shipyards with limited experience. They could protect convoys in the North Atlantic. They could hunt submarines in the Mid-Atlantic. They could escort amphibious forces in the Pacific. They could fight surface actions against overwhelming odds. They won the Battle of the Atlantic through accumulation. Each convoy protected was a victory. Each U-boat sunk was a victory. Each merchant ship that reached port was a victory. The victories accumulated until the German submarine force collapsed under losses it could not replace. The destroyer escorts made it happen. In June 1944, 82 convoys crossed the Atlantic. Not one merchant ship was lost to submarine attack. By this point, 130 destroyer escorts were operational in the Atlantic. U-boats could not penetrate the screens. Attempts to attack resulted in U-boat losses. Donitz admitted defeat. This was not dramatic. No great battle decided the outcome. Instead, thousands of convoys crossed safely. Millions of tons of cargo arrived. Troops, tanks, ammunition, fuel, food flowed from America to Britain. Operation Overlord became possible because destroyer escorts ensured the supplies reached England. The invasion succeeded because destroyer escorts protected the logistics. The destroyer escort represents a different kind of heroism. Not the heroism of Samuel Booker Roberts charging at Yamato. That was extraordinary, celebrated, remembered. But the ordinary heroism of USS Slater escorting convoy UGS-74 across the Atlantic. No submarines attacked. No combat occurred. The convoy arrived safely. Mission accomplished. This happened 176 times. 176 convoys. No losses. This was what destroyer escorts did. They were weapons of industrial attrition. Each ship represented a statement. American industry could build these faster than Germany could build submarines. American resources were sufficient to flood the ocean with escorts. The outcome was predetermined by production capacity. Germany never had sufficient submarines to overwhelm American escort production. The mathematics were inexorable. Today, only 2 destroyer escorts survive. USS Slater in Albany. USS Stewart. Delta Echo 238. On static display in Galveston, Texas. Both are cannon class. Both served in the Atlantic. Both survived the war. Neither fired a shot in anger. They represent the thousands of destroyer escort missions that succeeded through presence rather than violence. The destroyer escort was the answer to a specific problem: how to protect convoys with limited resources. The solution was to build cheap, simple ships in overwhelming numbers. Accept that individual ships had limitations. Rely on collective capability. Flood the ocean with platforms. Make it impossible for submarines to operate. This worked because American industry could sustain it. Britain alone could not have built 500 destroyer escorts. Neither could Germany or Japan. Only the United States possessed sufficient shipyard capacity, steel production, engine manufacturing, and labor pool to execute destroyer escort production at this scale. The escort program demonstrated what industrial warfare required: not individual technical superiority, not heroic actions by exceptional crews, but overwhelming material advantage applied systematically. 563 destroyer escorts outmatched 1,154 U-boats because destroyer escorts could protect convoys while U-boats could only attack them. Defense requires fewer resources than offense when defenders are present in sufficient numbers. The destroyer escort achieved this. At Samar, one destroyer escort fought like a battleship. In the Atlantic, hundreds fought like convoy guards. Both missions succeeded. The dramatic action receives attention. The mundane mission won the war. That is the lesson of the destroyer escort. Wars are won by platforms that can be built quickly, operated reliably, and deployed in overwhelming numbers. The Liberty ship delivered the cargo. The destroyer escort protected it. Together, they ensured Allied victory through industrial attrition. No amount of individual excellence by German submarine crews could overcome this material disparity. In November 1943, USS Buckley, Delta Echo 51, encountered German submarine U-66 on the surface at night. The submarine attempted to dive. Buckley rammed her. The destroyer escort's bow rode over the submarine's deck. The two vessels locked together. German sailors emerged from the conning tower. American sailors grabbed whatever weapons were available: rifles, pistols, coffee cups, potato mashers. A hand-to-hand fight erupted on the submarine's deck at 0200 hours in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Buckley's crew repelled the boarders. The submarine broke free. She attempted to dive. Buckley circled and dropped depth charges. U-66 surfaced again, burning. Her crew abandoned ship. She sank at 0330 hours. 36 survivors were pulled from the water. This engagement became legendary. But it represents the exception. Most destroyer escort missions involved steaming in circles around convoys for weeks without seeing an enemy. Sonar contacts that proved to be whales. Radar contacts that proved to be rain squalls. Depth charge attacks against suspected submarines that were probably underwater rock formations. And then, rarely, actual combat against actual submarines. The monotony was the point. U-boats could not attack if destroyer escorts were present. The escorts did not need to sink submarines to succeed. They needed to prevent submarines from attacking. Presence achieved this. 563 destroyer escorts created presence across the Atlantic. U-boats found convoys but could not approach them. Wolfpack tactics failed when convoys had sufficient escorts. The Battle of the Atlantic was won through ubiquity. By May 1945, 783 U-boats had been lost. Approximately 30,000 German submarine crew had died. 3/4 of the U-boat force. This was the highest loss rate of any military service in World War II. Destroyer escorts contributed directly to these casualties through depth charge and hedgehog attacks. They contributed indirectly by forcing U-boats to remain submerged, limiting their effectiveness, preventing attacks, and enabling aircraft to locate and sink them. The ultimate cost of destroyer escort operations was modest compared to their contribution. 8 ships lost to enemy action. Approximately 2,000 killed. This compares to 72,200 Allied merchant seamen killed in the Atlantic. The destroyer escorts mission was to prevent merchant losses. They succeeded. After mid-1943, merchant ship loss rates dropped precipitously. Destroyer escorts made the difference. The destroyer escort was the Jeep of the ocean. Simple design, mass production, deployed everywhere. Not glamorous, not powerful, not fast, but present, reliable, effective. Wars are won by such weapons. The platforms that can be built in sufficient numbers to be everywhere they are needed. Samuel Booker, Roberts fought for 35 minutes and died. Slater steamed for 2 years and survived. Both accomplished their missions. Both were destroyer escorts. Both were exactly what the Navy needed when it needed them. That is their legacy.